Hello, everybody. I'm Alan. I hold shift on a Frio.
My name is Andy Proper Neckrich.
And this is the Defuse. Let's get this thing lit and talk about day number 1 from CDL Paris. A very interesting weekend as a lot of very solid teams, obviously, are in the mix for this one, with really the only exception being there's no Minnesota, who, let's be honest, they might not be a major team anymore, and Chicago, who obviously didn't make the playoffs, so maybe they're not a major team anymore. Hard to say. We'll talk about all of that kind of coming forward, but I want to get opening expectations first, just generally speaking about what we saw, not today, just before, because we didn't get a chance to set up a prediction. So when it comes down to what your expectations were before the weekend, what were you kind of thinking looking at these pools as a whole?
Oh, I actually was pretty spot on. I mean, all of what we just witnessed on the CDL stream itself, I was pretty spot on with how everything was going to go through.
Well,
Definitely
okay
had
then.
Florida taking their match 3-0. Yeah, I know it better be okay then. I was right, even in that New York versus OGLA.
You were.
We got a little bit contested about that in last week's episode too, about New York versus OGLA, and I was gung ho. New York taking that 3-1, exactly how I had planned it out. Atlanta did not have them going to a map 5 versus Toronto, but
Me
we're going
neither.
to be able to dive into that a little bit more. But Dallas having some struggles against London yet again, that was to be expected as well.
For me, it was one of those things that I was looking at 3 key teams coming into this. Well, I guess you could argue even, well, okay, I'm looking at kind of all of them. Looking at 5 out of the 8 specifically. Let me just go ahead and just give it to you all the way through. Number 1 for me, I need to see Atlanta win this event, I think, for them to continue to be the number 1 team in the power rankings, which is the case in a lot of people's minds. Number 2, can Florida, are Florida the truth? Can they find a way to go back to back? I think if they're able to beat Dallas and Atlanta again, that is indeed the case. And then it's a proving ground for London, New York, and OpTic. All 3 teams coming off of very solid performances from before. Could they do that again? Obviously, that's 5 teams. There's only space for 4 of them in the playoff. So that's kind of where I'm looking as far as, what are the potential storylines coming through? Those were the ones that I was mostly looking at. My expectations, though, was that Atlanta would fix their hardpoint problems and have no problem getting through the opening portions of their pools. But obviously, we'll talk about it later. That wasn't necessarily the case. So it's just been kind of interesting, I think, to see how everything has kind of fared over the first couple of games that we had a chance to see. So let's start off with where it was at the very tippy top. Florida versus Paris. Again, the expectation was Florida should have the upper hand, but we have not seen Paris in quite some time. Would there be potential for Paris to upset here? I think both of us were thinking that no, there should not be a reason that happens. And well, it looks like we were right as Florida was able to find a pretty easy 3-0.
Yeah, and again, like Paris, I hate to just continuously throw shade to your very unfortunate run in CDL so far, but I mean, it's just not there, right? I mean, like you're seeing a lot of missed opportunities for them, a lot of outslaying, unfortunate mishaps that are coming their way as well. And it's very tough to say the least when you're looking at how Florida have had to play out their past few matches of literally just facing top contending teams. This coming into it when we were already building the bracket, there's no way that we saw Florida being as strong as they were, obviously coming off of their previous championship run just last week. But still, nevertheless, when you're going up against top contending teams and you're still not doing well, even with all of this time that you've been able to have just to study everything that you could be able to improve on, and we're still not seeing improvements from them, this is where things can get scary. Apart from a few rounds in Search and Destroys where we had Dens go absolutely massive for their team, there's still a lot of question marks that are surrounding Paris as a whole.
That was kind of my take as well. It's one of those things that Paris, they came out and they kind of exceeded expectations of what a lot of people had them, again, kind of in the bottom 2 of the league, with the opening power rankings just based on roster and experience alone. But the thing about this Florida team that really kind of stole the show more than Paris's quote-unquote underperforming, if you want to call it that, was really kind of showcased on that Hackney Yard domination. That opening set piece from the A flag to go for an instant neutral and triple cap was so ballsy. You're essentially sitting there saying that we're going to have a 3v5 in the warehouse and we're going to find a setup to win that engagement, and they did. Now, here's the thing. Against a more experienced, more veteran, and flat-out better team, I don't necessarily think that strategy is going to work out, and I think after teams will go back and rewatch that, I don't think they'll be caught off guard by it, but it's nonetheless a really interesting kind of cheeky ace up your sleeve to kind of add to the mix of your bag of tricks here to kind of keep your opponent guessing, and that is the most impressive thing that we saw from teams at the end of CWL last year in Black Ops 4, and even in the opening stages of Modern Warfare this year. The team that can make these little cheeky plays and keep their opponent guessing the best typically ends up on top. It's a risky play, but we see that it does indeed work, and I'm excited to see what else Florida's cooked up from last week going into this week.
I mean, when you have players like Pharaoh and Havoc going absolutely off, I mean, like you said, maybe against stronger teams, maybe with better gun skill, maybe with just better, 5-player in-house mechanics from just maneuvering as a team, playing as a team, and everything else in between. Maybe it doesn't end up working out. But we even seen Havoc and Pharaoh against the likes of Dallas Empire, for example, last weekend, being able to find a little bit more value. No, not on domination by any means, but closer to the search and destroy, to where we're seeing them just taking convincing and commanding virtues through the middle of the map to be able to turn the map right on its head in just for Florida's favor. Now, in domination, again, you already hit this point, so I don't want to, linger on it too much, but to be able to hit such a ballsy maneuver and just rely that Awakening, Skies, and Frosty are just able to lock down that entire middle map area all by their lonesome. It was a 3v5 essentially. It's ballsy. It's insane.
Yeah, I'd love to see it though, but without talking too much on Florida as a whole, we had an interesting conversation while the games are going on, and you had brought up that on some of the other outside content from the CDL, there was the conversation of how Simp kind of entered the league last year. How does that compare versus Awakening this year? And even though Awakening comes out, is able to instantly be plugged into Florida and win a championship, the buzz around Awakening is not nearly as insurmountable as it was for Simp, as his entrance came through in very similar fashion. Again, at CWL Open London, Simp was able to lead the Atlanta FaZe Black team to a championship there, and then immediately gets picked up and is able to take E United the distance, with their opening showcase. As you compare what Simp was able to do for E United last year versus what Awakening so far has showcased with Florida, do you think it's worth the fact that Awakening should have more buzz, or do you still think that what Simp brought to E United was more special so far?
I think it's definitely more special so far, because I mean, when you watch what Simp did when they walked into E United's roster, you walked away from that entire weekend. Although E United didn't end up winning Shift, you were still sitting there assuming that Simp might just be the best player in the game. They were able to piece it together with SMGs. Yeah. They were able to do it with a Paladin as well. And that's all off of their fresh start on LAN. Awakening has this special capability that they're able to walk into a realm, a very interesting society that we are in right now during COVID-19, that everything is online. So you get the comfort, you're playing at home, and there comes a lot of lack of anxiety with that too. You're not surrounded by a whole bunch of booming and yelling people. You're not surrounded by just the overall pressure of the heat of the stage and your teammates relying on you just being right next to you, and everything can be very tense, but you're in the comfort of your own home. Now, for Awakening, if we see a continuous series from them over and over again, to where they are putting themselves in a spot to where they might be one of the better players in the game, then yes, you can say over time that Awakening might have a better debut over time. But when it comes down to a first game drop inside a professional scene, I still think Simp holds it way over where Awakening currently is, because not only did they walk away with potentially being the best player in the game during Black Ops 4, but they didn't win the championship. That's one thing Awakening definitely has over Simp.
I mean, for me, I'm actually going to disagree. I think what Awakening has done so far for this Florida team is way more impactful than what Simp did on entry to E United. E United was not a bad team with JCap, and I'm not going to sit there and say that Florida Mutineers were a bad team with Box, but Florida obviously was going through some pretty monstrous woes, especially considering the fact that they were missing that flex role player who could go back and forth between an AR and an SMG seamlessly. E United, yeah, JCap may not have been the strongest player possible, and Simp is a better overall player than JCap if we're talking Black Ops 4 specifically, but I think what Awakening has done to immediately turn this team around to go from an 0-6 map count the week before he gets into to instantly beating the top 4 teams in the CDL, I think that Awakening deserves way more buzz than he's getting credit for, especially if Florida can find a way to not just make another playoff, not just make another grand final, but especially if they win another championship back-to-back.
Yeah, no, I agree with that point too. But you're again just looking at the overall individual caliber with what the buzz came in for. It's not just what Awakening did by themselves. So Awakening was there to enable the rest of the team, though definitely playing their part quite well. I'm agreeing with you there. So hold your horses. But you know, at the same point in time for Simp just coming in, no E United again, did not win that weekend outright, but they were also able to make a lot of buzz just by their own stuff. There was a handful of times, yes, in the previous weekend that Awakening was able to piece together a lot by themselves. You saw it again just in today's matches, but still, it's more or less what Awakening's able to do for Pharaoh and Havoc to go off, what Skies is able to do on that domination of St. Petrograd against Atlanta FaZe. It's all of those things that are inconclusive that makes Awakening maybe a little bit less talked about, but I definitely agree that this player definitely needs some more buzz because coming in like they did and being able to make the ways that they did too, definitely cannot go unspoken.
Yeah, if Florida wins back to back right here, I think there should be some major considerations for
Sure.
Awakening to be put into the ballot of at least Rookie of the Year. If Florida continues to do well, I think there should be conversation for maybe to break into the top 5 of potentially MVP. But obviously, like you mentioned, they also have a whole Caesar Skies is on that team, and he's been playing absolutely incredible lately.
And one of the best ARs in the league, and with them, yeah.
Absolutely the case. Let's talk Dallas and London, though. Another game 5 in this matchup, and it ends with a Piccadilly and another letdown for London as they aren't quite able to get past the Dallas Empire. 6-2 the case. We talked specifically, though, about this London squad, and for me, I thought they had the potentials of being a major Cinderella this weekend based on the performance that they had the last outing, where both Shawnee and Zero played incredibly well. This time through, though, Shawnee he must have had a migraine going through these respawns because he was triple negative in the rip on Gunrunner. He did have a okay Petro when it was a 252-29 in favor of London, but it came at the cost of them running a double AR setup just for him to feel a little bit more comfortable. My whole thing about this London team was this was not what I expected, even though it goes game 5. I really do believe that outside of the Gunrunner Search and Destroy, which was rather convincing for not just London, but also Shawnee's performance, this was a pretty big mismatch at the end of it, even though it went to a game 5.
Hey, even though it went to a game 5, you're saying that just so wonderfully. I mean, you get a 100-point club by Dallas on Gunrunner. You only drop 7 kills in total if you're Shawnee, and then you're able to do more than that on a search and destroy. Something's got to be going wrong for these London Royal Ravens. And I do believe that it was Wudskins that came on Twitter just before the matches actually went underway today, that they were talking about how they had walked into some devastating news. And I hope everything's okay with Wudskins too. So, you know, it also comes down to a mentality thing that we're looking at for these London Royal Ravens, who did in their previous outing, did make it to grand finals against Chicago Huntsmen. Now, they didn't win, obviously, but we were definitely looking at a stronger team. Now, you can also say that, going back to your previous point of the mismatch by going against it could arguably be the best team in the league right now, the Dallas Empire, but still, nevertheless, what you are worried about for this team is inconsistency. With champs right around the corner, if Shawnee is beating their numbers in search and destroy comparatively what they did on hardpoint, you got a lot of things you got to keep considerative of if you do get smoked on your first hardpoint and you're unable to keep things close in that search and destroy, right down to the hard point that they did secure shift on St. Petrograd, it was nowhere convincing. Let's put it that way.
My whole thing is, I would not be, if you're somebody who maybe missed this matchup and you're looking at it saying, wow, London took Dallas to 5. I don't feel as anxious or worried about Dallas in the upcoming matchup that they're going to be putting themselves into just because this went to game 5. Again, I think what we saw, you know, Petro's a weird map, and yeah, London did get a huge rotation in the second set of hills to kind of give them that lead, which became a little bit too much insurmountable for Dallas to come back in. And yeah, the Gunrunner Search and Destroy, it really never felt like Dallas was clicking, but you come out, you 250-84, you beat them on domination by 50 plus. I feel pretty strong that Dallas should not really be all that worried about that result in whole. On the other side, though, you know, for London, we brought it up just kind of briefly. Shawnee did not have a great outing here. And in total, when you look at a player like Shawnee versus a player like Nasty, who we anticipate should be that guy that was wanting to get there initially. Again, Shawnee was just the sub filled in when Nasty was picked up. The assumption was he was going to be instantly inserted into the starting roster. This kind of feels like a Florida Mutineers and Mock situation where Shawnee, yeah, feels more comfortable in certain situations than others, but Nasty is that guy that could do it all. And I'm kind of concerned a little bit that if London cannot find a way to get Nasty over to the States, that this could be one of those same kind of turmoils where you're not getting the same level of performance that you're hoping to out of your starting five.
Yeah, Nasty, if you guys are unfamiliar with this talented individual, has been playing in the Challengers Cups, actually. I believe just finished played with, what was it, Connect Fives, like Shane, Mad Cat, and Wee Man, Nolson, potentially. I think that's the roster I'm remembering for Nasty. And they've looked great throughout all of that, too. But maybe that's, again, just to hit this point home that Shift is talking about, that you actually need for London Royal Ravens. It might not just be a team chemistry thing, but just to bring in some young talent that you can end up finding some, clear-cut tournament results in. Because if now more than ever, London Royal Ravens lingering around the center of all the CDL teams could definitely use some of that spark.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, it really did feel like the last outing that these guys had, that there was some kind of a special sauce in the mix just for that weekend in specific. It was a little bit of a weaker weekend as far as how many quality teams were there, with really the exception of Chicago. And now that you're in the mix with, like you mentioned, teams that are around or above you in the league as a whole, does this really kind of showcase more of what we kind of came to expect from London as being just a very middle of the pack team? It kind of feels that way. I'm hoping they have a strong bounce back tomorrow, simply because they are going to be pulling up against a much weaker opponent in the Paris Legion. That's going to be a rematch from when they played in the opening weekend as a whole. So that's one that you're hoping you could come back and take a win, and then you can get a chance to square up versus Dallas and Florida again. But I'm not super optimistic about these guys getting a chance to beat any of those two teams that right now, at least in my mind, are two top three squads in the league.
I agree entirely. I mean, for London Royal Ravens as a whole, I mean, you say middle of the pack team. It's so weird for me to honestly say that, just because you have what are arguably one of the best, if not the best, sniper in the entire league with Weston.
It has to be the best sniper in the league. Has to be.
Even what we saw, what they were doing on Gunrunner, just finding so much insurmountable value, and what that offers for a team against Dallas Empire. You saw those 2 rounds that they won. They played so fast that there wasn't even a bomb plant in time for Dallas Empire on their offense. So what does London Royal Ravens do? They do what they do best on Search and Destroy. They play it slow. They let you make the mistakes, and they have such good map knowledge and the terrain available to them, to where Weston can put themselves in a prime position to be able to find kills. And that's where Zero can come to life too.
Yeah.
And to go back to your previous point of where they were able to find a lot of value against in that run to make it to the semifinals, that's when Zero came into the mix. And that's a little bit more of that lightning that needs to come in for London Royal Ravens if they want to be a top contending team too. You need continuous action like that too, and we're just not seeing it from Shawnee. It's not consistent enough.
It needs to be lightning, not lightning in a bottle, if that's kind of the way that I kind of interpreted all of that. It needs to be something that's more of a consistent...
Yeah, uncork that sucker. Let it out.
Let Hurricane Katrina come back in full force with that lightning.
Whoa!
Maybe too far. Let's talk New York and OpTic Gaming LA. This was a game that I had my eyes on for multiple reasons, mostly because this is a matchup that I think kind of goes to prove who out of the team that makes the most recent additions, bringing Cheeto for OpTic, Mac for New York, who's going to be the squad to really kind of start to run away with things. And well, it really does feel like this matchup was going to kind of maybe dictate who is the next major contender up, as both of these surging teams were able to square off against one another for the first time. And we were not disappointed, I'll say that much. It was a very good series. Obviously, it goes 3-1 in favor of New York, where New York was able to kind of get their momentum rolling immediately after they found the 6-1 of the Arklov Peak Search and Destroy, where I will not lie, OpTic and all the progress they had made in this map looked like it was just completely thrown out the window. They looked absolutely lost, but then a very close Gunrunner Dom, and then I won't call it a blowout, but at least a convincing finish to the Hackney Yard, where New York never gave up those P2 spawns. They cruised their way to this 3-1. My biggest thing about this New York team is this going to be a sign of things to come for their Search and Destroy? Because that was my biggest worry going into this matchup, was that their Search would let them down.
Well, definitely wasn't let down in the Arklov Peak within the series, but You can also make the argument that yes, New York Subliners, they beat OpTic LA 6-1 on Arcloth Peak. They looked great, sure, but that's also not par for the course that OpTic LA looked terrible on Arcloth Peak too. So there's also that to come into thoughts as well. And we're definitely going to get a little bit more answers on that, Alan, as we look into our round 2 matches. They're going up against Atlanta FaZe, who might be one of the top S&D teams in the entire league right now. And we'll talk about them versus Toronto later on for sure. But still, for New York Subliners, your weakest point right now is your search and destroy. Can you close out map 5s? Well, you're going to be going up against the map 5 king against Atlanta FaZe tomorrow. So there's still a lot of question marks around the New York Subliners. But where they did look good, at least on Arcloth Peak that we got to see today, is that they're no longer one-dimensional ponies. They're no longer just committing the same site, the same strategy over and over and over again. They're recycling a lot of different virtues that they could offer for themselves. Mac Melt's carrying the bomb as the entry fragger, pushes through a smoke, while you also have Temp overlooking them with an AR. There's a lot of things that New York Subliners have in their back pocket now that we have had a week off or two from the last time that we've seen them, that could definitely par for the course for a deeper run inside this tournament here this weekend.
And that's kind of my follow-up segue, and I'm glad that you kind of listed it. With the improvement that we saw in Search and Destroy, granted, it was just one map, and it was on Arcloth Peak, a map that they have had some good rehearsal on since Mac got into the mix. Is this team a potential top 4 in the league? My immediate answer would be yes, because not only did they get better at not just today, but they've been getting better at the search and destroy since Mac got into the mix. But more importantly, their domination is taking a pretty significant upturn. This is a squad that is still just 6-13 in domination, and before their win tonight, when they played on Gunrunner Dom, they were 1-6 on that map. Now they're 2-6. Their differential is getting smaller and smaller if they lose. If they win, they're finding a way to actually grow that differential. So again, if you're looking at the statistics as far as where this team ranks currently in the domination, it's not pretty as they currently sit as the number 11 team. But that stat line is getting better and better and better and better. And if it keeps uptrending like that, I would not be surprised if New York can continue to be consistent in hardpoint. Granted, yes, they did lose the Ramaza, but that's a map that they're 50-50 in now at this point in the season. You're not really looking at that super negatively. I think when you compare this team to a Florida, to a Chicago, to a Dallas, and even to an Atlanta, this team could absolutely hold their own. And not just that, I think they could beat those teams on a pretty regular basis.
On a regular basis would be tough against Florida Mutineers. You talk about how New York Subliners are getting better and better in domination. Overall, since Mac Melts came in the line, like, yes, we have seen continuous improvements from New York. The Florida Mutineers, they're also on that upwards trend there, brother. Like, I don't know. I think that their line's a little bit higher.
I get you, but I mean, since Mac got in the roster, the first week that he showed up, they went 1-1 versus Chicago Huntsmen. Map 5 and then a map 4 loss. Against the Atlanta FaZe, they went to map 5, not once, but twice.
And 100 point clubbed them on hardpoint.
And 100 point clubbed them on hardpoint on that Petra hardpoint. So, I don't know, man. I'm actually, like, I would be interested to see them play up against Florida, just because I think that matchup will be pretty telling of both of these squads. But we're going to get New York, Atlanta tomorrow, and I am not looking at that matchup saying that, oh, Atlanta should be fine here, no problem. In fact,
me neither.
I'm kind of pulling for the underdog in that one.
I mean, you know, for me, for a certain aspect for New York Subliners, I've been on the Mac Melts hype train ever since they came into the league. I was over the moon when we got to see Mac Melts finally getting the recognition they deserved and being able to come onto a roster of New York Subliners and being able to play the role ever so wonderfully. Just letting this team of New York Subliners be able to, be the team that we know that they were just from rosters alone at the beginning of the season, where we get to see Zuma and Attach go absolutely off. We get to see accuracy go off the rails from time to time, and that's fantastic. And it also allows Temp to be the player that we know that they can be on the inside. And this is all just from Mac Bounce, just playing objective, also just being the initiator in certain parts of hardpoint. And you got to see that today against OpTic LA. Whether you're on hardpoint domination or search and destroy, Mac Melts is anything shorter of just the enabler for this team, but also pulls their weight too. And that's what you have to be afraid of when you are going up against Atlanta. Atlanta is nowhere near safe in this matchup because although we're talking about how New York could be getting better, Florida's getting better, even OpTic LA, hell, you can even say that they've been getting better too, where Atlanta FaZe have been kind of on a downward spiral. And especially in the respawn modes, this is where things can get very interesting, and their search game too. it's a little bit of plot holes open up inside
I
of them
agree.
that I think New York could actually take advantage of. Shift, this is going to map 5 tomorrow. I'm calling it right here. If you like, I'm
Hold
not
your
gonna go ahead
horses,
and
Fred. Hold your horses. We will set that up later. You're
okay,
on a
all
roll,
right.
but I'm gonna put an immediate stop onto that because we still need to
I
talk
was getting
about.
hot. I was getting hot.
I can tell, and that hoodie's coming off
Man, it's
very
fluctuating.
soon, very soon. Speaking of things getting hot, though, how about Toronto and Atlanta? A little bit uncharacteristic to see Atlanta. Well, okay, not lately. It is characteristic for them to go map 5, but Toronto once again finding themselves a new substitution in the mix, kind of, I won't say last second, but Kleenex comes and makes his CDL debut since he played at CWL World Championships. Last year was Singularity. They're able to send things pretty darn far as they're able to get it going. Pardon me, that's the wrong video. We'll swap that over real quick. They're able to get Atlanta all the way to a game 5, round 11, which was a massive surprise. And my whole thing about this was a matchup that Atlanta needed to come out and dominate. And the bottom line was they absolutely did not do that.
No, not even a little. I mean, when you're dealing with bans on search and destroy, I don't care if you're 8-2, now 8-3 Atlanta walking into Arcloft Peak. You're dealing with bans on search and destroy, and that's just really tough to just combat with just from the S&D paralysis that player brings in general, and Cammy with the scope too. We
Played
only
well
really
today.
saw played very well for Toronto, and you're also looking at a certain aspect for when you are going to that map 5 of Gunrunner. You can't undersell Cammy's performance too. Yes, a little bit lackluster in the respawn. Most importantly, in that hard point of St. Petrograd, to where I believe they only dropped maybe 19 kills. But when you're looking at a team that has a strong search record about this, and I'm sure that Visions, wherever you are in this world, is certainly smiling at me saying this, Toronto's on the up and up. They are definitely looking like a very strong team that you have to be concerned with, especially with Kleenex having a fantastic debut that they did today, being able to drop 30 kills in the first hard point, even in a 250 to 172 loss. Yeah, that looks fantastic. Being able to fill the shoes that are much needed for them to be able to come into this team. And even although they were slow to start on Search Destroy on Arcloft Peak, again, you're surrounded by Cammy. You got medals, you got methods, and you got bans. So I mean, yeah, you're perfectly fine for Kleenex to come into Search and Destroy and not just drop bombs when you're surrounded by a team that is as strong looking in the search game as Toronto has all season long.
It's one of those things that I am upset about Atlanta's performance today, and I think anyone should be, especially if you're an Atlanta fan. You know,
I think
when
Atlanta's
we
upset
were,
about Atlanta's performance.
they should be a little bit upset about their own performance. But we talked about it at the end of our last episode when we were saying that I have no concern that Atlanta is going to go to the workshop, figure out their small discrepancies on hardpoint, correct them, come out hot. One of those discrepancies when they were doing it was the fact that Atlanta was essentially playing a 40-20 game. As soon as we're at the 30-second mark on a hardpoint, we're good. We'll just go rotate. We'll take the next initial 30 to 40, and then we'll give up the scrap, and we'll take the next initial 30 to 40. But when you're giving up that much space and you kind of slow down your roll when it comes to how often you're hitting the scrap time and contesting the backside 30 of those hills, you get worked on. One bad string of kills, all of a sudden, they are absolutely in your face on these rotations, and Kleenex was the one to really kind of showcase that. He looked great during all 3 of the respawns today. I've been waiting for this guy to play since the CWL Championships, which, yes, I know that on a global scale, that was the first time that a lot of people had a chance to watch him. But I'll tell you, as someone who spent a lot of time watching the amateur scene, this guy had been doing that all year long in Black Ops 4. It was only a matter of time before that style was going to showcase itself versus pros. And now we have it. So when it comes to Kleenex in his debut, we talked about it last week, how Cammy, he needs some help. He cannot be relied upon to be that superstar solely on Toronto. Is Kleenex the guy to potentially tilt Toronto over the edge?
I think Kleenex definitely helps tilting them over the edge. I mean, also can't go without saying. I mean, it's not like Classic was a poor part of this roster either. I think when you're breaking down their respawn as a whole, like Cammy can only pop off so many times, sure, but when you're thinking about what Methods is unable to do in respawn, definitely doesn't help them by any means necessary. I think Kleenex definitely helps them tip over the edge, but I don't know if it's necessarily what's going to make them as pointy to break through the threshold that they need to be able to break in towards the rest of the season. Because I mean, Shifts, The elephants in the room, man. They're dead.
And
They're dead
it's
last.
tromping around.
Yeah. It's loud as hell. It's loud as hell. My headphones can only cut off so much sound. They are last. And although I would definitely sit here and argue that they would probably finish higher than the Seattle Surge if their woes don't get fixed,
Maybe.
when you got the rest of the bottom four being New York Subliners on the up and up, LA Gorillas are getting better, having Saints coming back into the mix too. I could see them beating Paris, but that's not necessarily a hard matchup for anybody, it may seem. We're going to get a lot of our answers tomorrow versus OpTic LA. Again, another team that is on the up and up, and we're going to see how much value CleanX can truly bring to the table. To have players like Bance pop off in Search and Destroy, to have Metals being able to clutch up like they did in certain aspects of Respawn and in Search and Destroy, and if Cammy can keep up their sniper opportunities whenever they present themselves.
My whole thing is I'm sold on Cammy being a starter. I'm sold again on Metals being a starter. I thought the launch weekend he played incredible. I was surprised when he got benched in the first place. And I'm sold on CleanX being a starter now for this team. I'm not necessarily sold on Bance, although his Search and Destroy performances today, definitely where he usually shines. I'm not sold on people like Classic, and I have not been convinced on Methods either as far as the main AR is concerned. I want to see Brack. I want to see Brack play. And I really, it's one of those things, man, that I feel like these roster changes took way too long to happen. They were mentioning on the broadcast today that it's the last couple of weeks. You've got maybe 30 days left before you have to solid things in for where you're going to be going into the playoffs. And for a roster that's been hot, cold all year long, the one thing that tells you off the rip is that there's no consistency here. And you might be able to lend it towards the fact that, okay, well, it's Classic one weekend. Okay, never mind. It's not Metals this weekend. And all these little minor substitutions. I just feel like there was a chance for these guys to utilize, number one, a challengers roster, get some of those guys playing throughout the year in the path to pro to see, hey, players like CleanX are a major game changer in this title. Let's get them in a little bit sooner. I think that Toronto really dropped the ball on not having a challengers team. When you're going for a 10-man roster, 5 people on the bench at any given point in time is something that it's just like, ooh, why? So I think they missed an opportunity here. I think that there are 5 solid players that could make Toronto a contestant, but we're at the point still this year we just don't know who that's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing teams, again, just tapping deep into their reserves. You saw Spark come in for LAG, then soon back out, and now we're seeing Saints being able to work some magic for LA Gorillas. Yeah. Mac Meltz comes in for New York Subliners. Cheeto comes in for OpTic LA. You even saw like the only other team that could really come to mention about like having some roster woes would probably end up being Paris Legion, not really finding any pieces of their puzzles, but probably the biggest success out of any team that has been able to work with their rosters. Look at the damn Florida Mutineers. Look at what they've been able to do when Pharaoh came in. Look what they were able to do when they got Awakening in.
Those are all off of challengers pickups, though. I'm talking about like an in-house roster. We haven't seen Paris fiddle with it.
Just roster swaps all together. They're not really, unless there's something crazy going on a stream that I'm not watching, and they're working on some other things behind the scenes that they're scrimming out with these members, and they're not necessarily finding the gel that they're looking for. Something's got to give, because I mean, you said it. Like you only have this event, and I believe 2 more for Toronto Ultra to be playing in before we are in champs. Do you really want to be starting in the losers bracket that deep?
No.
Yeah. Why would you? Why would you?
There's the easy answer. No, we do not want to have that. Before we start talking about tomorrow's predictions, again, a reminder here that we do also answer questions. And I don't know if the promotion was really set out in this tweet, but if you respond to this Twitter that I just kind of linked in chat for you guys with a question, and we decide to answer it here on stream, you will get 5 CMG credits. Pretty easy way for you to kind of earn some credits. So make sure you go over there and type out a question. Make sure you put hashtag the Defuse at the end of your response. And we'll be good to kind of answer those through and give you a chance for some free credits as we kind of finish this one out. But as we have a chance here, let's just kind of go down the rundown. Let's start with the elimination matches first. Paris versus London, a battle of Europe. We've seen it once before. It did not go London's way. It was a 3-0 last time for Paris, the last time they played, but that was way back in January or February, whenever it was, back in Minnesota in the Icy Winters. You kind of lended some of your thoughts, but who's kind of your favorite of this matchup as you take a look at that head-to-head?
I think that maybe Paris that they'll squeak away a map or two. I couldn't tell you if that's a hard point or search and destroy, just because Paris are so damn inconsistent on all of their maps as it is. But I think London takes this. It's gonna probably go to 4 maps. Hell, even if it goes to 5, I just have London winning this outright.
Fair enough. I've got a big concern for Paris in their search and destroy. They have not won a search now in their last 3 outings. Last time they did, it was versus a Minnesota Rocker team, which now is near the bottom of the CDL rankings in search and destroy. So take from that what you will. And beyond that, in those 3 outings, they've only won a single hard point. So there's not a lot to look at in this Paris team right now to give you hope that they're going to come through this London Royal Ravens squad, even though, like we mentioned, yeah, they took Dallas to 5, but getting a 100-point club and getting smoked on the Piccadilly search, where you have to be good, not only because it's quote-unquote home ground, but you've got the best sniper in the game in Wuskin, and they also got hit by 50 points at the Dom. I still think this London team is the better squad going into that one. But this is the interesting one. OpTic Gaming LA now going up against the Toronto Ultra in the other knockout from Group B. My thoughts here initially is that OpTic should not have a problem. I still feel confident, even though they did lose to New York today. I thought they looked pretty solid, with the exception being the domination here. I'm interested to see if Toronto can really muster up the energy to have a diverse enough map pool to fight up against OpTic, or will OpTic get the benefit of them playing on their strongest maps like Azir Cave and things like that for their hardpoint?
Yeah, I actually have Toronto taking this. Believe it or not,
Do you really? Okay.
yeah, I do. I mean, originally, you remember talking to me that I did have New York originally beating OpTic LA. Obviously, I did have Atlanta beating Toronto, not in map 5, but it's still regardless of the matter. But then I originally did have OpTic LA beating Toronto in my originally generated bracket. But then I watched the OpTic LA match
Oh,
today.
there's a twist.
But then I watched their match today, and I want you to look deep inside my brown eyes here, OpTic LA. You got to figure out what the hell you're doing on search. You got to figure out what the hell flag we're trying to go for on domination.
Yeah, it's
Otherwise,
true.
this Toronto squad today is going to gobble you up. If New York Subliners were able to chew you up and spit you back out, as convincing as they did in a certain series of gunfights, just because you didn't know where the hell to be on the map or what the hell you were trying to go for in certain aspects and a one-dimensional hit on Arklov Peak, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy. I would even say that Seattle Surge in the juncture that we saw OpTic LA come out today, that they would even beat OpTic in a match at this current juncture of time. I don't really have much high hopes for OpTic LA heading into tomorrow. If it even goes to a map 5, and we have to see that 5th search and destroy map, I hate to tell you, OpTic LA fans, but Toronto's definitely got you beat.
Man, I want to sit there and take, like, here's the thing, that OpTic Gaming team, their gunrunner domination has not been notoriously good, and New York has essentially hard vetoed St. Petro all year long. I don't even know if they know what the map looks like at this point, because they've never played it. But I think if OpTic, obviously, that must have been, you know, if you think about it, if New York hard vetoes St. Petro, that means that OpTic chose to go to gunrunner. I don't think they make that choice again. They have been good on Hackney Yard, and they've been good since they've made the Cheeto edition on St. Petro. I don't know, man. I've got OpTic taking this one in 4.
I'm sure many people do.
Surprised. I am surprised of how bad OpTic looked on Arklov Peak, considering that in the last 3 weeks they've played it about 9 different times. But I still think that based on what I saw in the hard point, even though they lose the Hackney Yard to New York today, they still look pretty good overall. They lose, obviously, the favored side, and you heard Merc and Maven talking very critically. The map is just not good. You know, you start on P2, you typically just win the map unless something wonky happens, and that was kind of the case today. I'm at the point where I think that OpTic still has a chance to make it into the playoff and come back through no matter who loses between New York and Atlanta. And they can not only beat Toronto, but also beat the loser of that winners matchup to get into that playoff. I still think there's a very solid chance they could do that. And I would be interested to see, you know, what the percentages look like. What are the odds looking like? You know, what is the community as a whole kind of thinking about this OpTic team? Because yeah, there were some moments where it was like, man, this does not look good for OpTic. But there were also moments where we go, okay, like they're still playing as well as we thought they had in the last couple of weeks. Let's take to the upper side of the bracket. We get a rematch, thank goodness. Florida versus Dallas. Last time we saw it, it went 5, Mr. Proper, and it was a thrilling set. Really everything pretty darn close with the exception of one search and destroy and the Dom at that point. What are your biggest takeaways as far as how does Dallas get the rematch win versus Florida here?
Better be ready for Caesar Skies to whoop your ass there, Dallas, because I mean, like it's gonna get interesting. Although I will say this, there was a lot of different points in time that we saw Crimsix actually go absolutely off rails in a lot of different aptitudes of respawn today, which is a little bit out of character considering the SMG lineup that you do have on Dallas. You still have Shotzi, the top contender for Rookie of the Year. Obviously, I'm sure all of us could agree with that, unless Awakening comes through the mix and absolutely blows you out of the water again, Dallas. And I think when you're thinking about this Florida Mutineers roster coming off of their hot championship win just last weekend, you have a lot of tape to be studying. We didn't get a lot of interesting looks to see how Florida Mutineers were able to look from about a 5-day span from winning the championship into this exact weekend, absolutely bulldozing over Paris Legion today. So tomorrow's going to be a really good look to see what Florida Mutineers are seemingly able to improve on in that little bit of time. I know just saying that, but just winning a championship, but you could be at the top, but you still got to be able to polish your improvements versus a Dallas Empire roster that knows that they're trying to keep their crown on their heads and wants to be the best team in the league. For Dallas Empire, though, I'm not going to lie here, Chief. I think Florida Mutineers just might end up being that team that is just going to continue to smoke all the top 3 teams already, and they're just going to continue their upwards momentum, especially when you got Skies popping off, Havoc and Pharaoh having their way. I mean, if Pharaoh can repeat the performance that we saw today against Dallas Empire, I think every team has to be worried.
I think so too. For me, this matchup, I hate to default to a really easy response. It comes down to the map vetoes. I think if there's a very similar set for what we saw in the winter semifinal last time around between these two teams, I expect the results to be the same. Gunrunner and Ramaza were two of the most rehearsed maps for the Florida Mutineers going into that winter semifinal. On hardpoint is what I mean there. I should probably specify that. And they were able to take both of those maps away. So that's what I'm looking at. The hard point vetoes, I think, need to be a little bit better, and that's troubling for Dallas because your hard veto has pretty much been Azir Cave. You have not been necessarily given the opportunity to play Hackney Yard lately, and you're 50-50 on Petro. So if they take away one of the two, probably Ramaza more than they would Gunrunner, Florida's not an Azir Cave team, so I don't think you have to worry about that. And on top of that, the Florida Mutineers are also not a St. Petro team, so you should be able to get the maps that you want. That was the biggest takeaway for me last time. Florida got both hard points that they wanted, the Gunrunner and the Ramaza, and for me, I think that needs to change if there's going to be a swap up as far as who wins that matchup. But for New York and Atlanta, let's keep this one brief here. I've got New York having a pretty decent time versus this Atlanta team in Respawn, as once again, we saw this Atlanta team is not making corrections that they needed to from last weekend to this week. And granted, it is a short turnaround for them, but they did not look particularly great in the domination last week. They finished off their 2 pivotal matchups versus Florida and LA with 2 pretty dominating losses on the domination. And we've seen that this team versus an okay Toronto team on Search and Destroy also is a bit scary there. So I don't really feel convinced by anything right now from this Atlanta FaZe team at the moment.
I mean, if there's one thing you got to be feeling good with if you're an Atlanta fan, is Stellium. That's one thing consistently always popping off. But how many times are you going to rely on Stellium to clutch your Search and Destroy rounds?
You can't for much longer. Yeah,
exactly. How many times are you going to rely on Stellium in a hardpoint or a domination to find 3 and then being able to turn the tides of the fight to be able to go flip a neutral flag? Just because Stellium went off in the middle of the map and they were able to take your respawns and skyrocket them into flipping a more favorite side of the map. You can't really rely on it for too long, and that's the troublesome part too. I talked about this a little bit more in my own personal content, but still, I mean, for Priesta to not really have as blowout as a series as we've been seeing from them. They did look very good. Keep in mind, and I believe both hard points today, that they were able to showcase their ability at least to be able to exist in the flank. But still, you're working with the Toronto squad that might not always have the greatest respawn backing behind them. But more importantly, as slow as the start as we're seeing from Priesta and as quiet as a Beezy and Simpward today too,
it's 2 weeks in a row.
Pop off moments. It's not good. It's again, I talked about how New York earlier today before Shift put a pin in me. Are on this very, very upward climb is New York. But Atlanta FaZe, they're declining. And that's the scariest part about this roster that was built off the Search and Destroy. Teams are going to start figuring out. I'm not necessarily saying that New York would be able to absolutely bulldoze them in a Search and Destroy, but it's going to be close. I do have this going to map 5, but I still have Atlanta taking it just because In map 5, they seem to get pummeled on down, and then they just power up, and then Celium drops 18 kills, and then that's that.
And that's that. That's the way that goes. So you're
But
saying
18 and 7.
your overall
is
predictions. Who gets into playoffs for Sunday? Who's your 4?
That's tough. Atlanta, New York, Dallas, Florida. They're literally all the round 2 matches. I don't necessarily see like London will beat Paris. Whoever loses versus Florida and Dallas will beat London. Continuing onward with that, whoever loses versus New York and Atlanta, I know you're probably sitting here cringing at it too because you really want your OpTic LA boys to do well. I don't really see them being able to beat New York. Honestly speaking, the way that I have it, I don't see Toronto being able to do it either. So I say, look at your round 2 matches tomorrow: Florida, Dallas, New York, Atlanta. Those are your playoff. Those are your semifinal teams.
I've got 3 of the same 4. New York beats Atlanta. Florida beats Dallas.
So
Dallas beats London to get in. So Florida and Dallas from Group A. New York from Group B. OpTic Gaming beats Atlanta and Toronto to get into the playoffs.
You have the most blasted takes on the Defuse. Like, I don't understand.
I can see it happening, man. If again, I'm not convinced by Atlanta's changes.
What mystical ball are you looking into?
And Toronto, yeah, they had a good day today, but are they going to be prepared enough on everything? Again, a map set that will likely look very different than what they saw today. That's my whole thing. I've got OpTic upsetting Atlanta and Atlanta not getting into the playoff. We'll see how blasted and wrong I am.
That Shift has a mouse and keyboard and some monitors on his face. He's got like a damn crystal ball over there.
Here's the thing. I will clip this portion of the show, and if I am wrong, it'll open the show tomorrow.
Good.
Okay.
Good. I'm not on the show tomorrow. I just can't wait to watch.
Fair enough. We're going to say farewell. You guys apparently didn't want free credits, didn't answer the questions thread in Twitter, so we're just going to go ahead and say goodbye for now. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, and goodbye. Catch us tomorrow as the CDL finishes up. We'll be back with another episode of The Defuse, and like Proper just hinted at, it'll be the debut of Austin Visions Neal. Let's see what his CDL debut will look like. Man, that's going to be fun. I'll have to bring the Fuego, make sure he feels the heat up in the kitchen, almost similarly to how Andy does with this this hoodie that he's got on today. As I don't know how you stood through your lights and this show with that hoodie on the entire way through. You're a maniac.
I ate some tacos and I got cold internally. What do you want from me?
I want nothing else. Just that. Just tacos. Just more tacos. Fair enough.
That's right.
So long, friends. We'll catch you guys tomorrow. Until then, make sure that fuse does not fizzle out. Till next time, so long.